Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Khalid Yaasin. We are very happy to have you with us. I want to start with, who is Khalid Yaasin, and can you tell us briefly about your life?
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. I was born in New York, 1946, Christian parents, and I grew up in sort of as an orphan. Although I had parents, I accepted Islam in 1965 from a very dignified personality by the name of Sheikh Ahmed Faisal. 1965 was the same year that Malcolm X was assassinated. So he was assassinated in February, and I became Muslim in October.
How was your life in regards to faith? What were you believing in?
Well, the Christian, the foster homes that I were in, each one of them were a different persuasion of Christianity. We can say like it was like a buffet. So Methodist, Episcopalian, Baptist. So I had the whole spectrum by the time that I was 16 years old. And then I went into the military service, and I was in the Air Force for 2.5 years. So when I was in the military service, the Catholic religion was the most dominant. And so I had an occasion to go and talk to a priest, because I thought that, the priest is a person that he can mentor you or whatever. And then I saw some inconsistencies in that. So I tried my hand at Catholicism, but it was just too rigid, too much mystique, too European, too clinical. And then there was some tremendous contradictions inside the Catholic Church that manifested itself later on.
Can you tell us about some of those contradictions?
So while I was in the Air Force, I was still trying to practice Christianity, traditionally in some forms. It wasn't making sense to me when I was 7, but you digest it because it's given to you. But there were issues that were not making sense.
Like?
Well, Jesus being God and his own son, that didn't make sense to me. And then he's also somehow the personality of the Holy Ghost. So, the Trinity, this whole 3-in-1 concept in a person, 3 separate persons, but one God. It just didn't make sense to me.
So how did your journey to Islam start?
At 17 years old, I remember riding on a train. I saw this letter. It was the New York Times, and New York Times did a complete full-page advertisement, or they printed the letter of Malcolm from Mecca. So I remember reading that letter, and in that letter, Malcolm, he mentioned words like Mecca, the Prophet Muhammad, he mentioned the Kaaba, he mentioned the Quran. So just 5 or 6 or 7 things that he said in that letter, Hajj, Arafat, and I never heard those words before. So at that time, we didn't have social media. If you were fortunate as a young person, and I was one of those fortunate young people, I had a set of what was called at that time the Encyclopedia Britannica. So I went to the encyclopedia and I looked up these words. That was it. I never saw those words before. When I understood those words, I understood why Malcolm was moved. I understood why he could not put his car into reverse.
So you were very inspired by him. Did you meet Malcolm X?
So I started looking into this nation of Islam that he evolved out of. I started looking at his words and his trip to Mecca. And just before he was assassinated, I had the chance to attend one of his talks in Harlem. And it was a very cold morning. I think he spoke from the Hotel Teresa, which is no longer there. And I was one of the people that was there. Thousands of people were in the street to listen to Malcolm, to see him. We saw him. We were on the roof, myself and 2 or 3 others. And his security saw us on the roof and told us to come down. We came downstairs, and of course we were very cold. And he called us over and we shook his hand. And when I look back now, that was very memorable. It's just something that happened at that time. Malcolm was electric. He was a personality that African Americans had never seen. But Malcolm took his shahada. He was assassinated in February 1965. I was 17 or 18. And so he was assassinated in February, and I became Muslim in October.
So how did you take your shahada?
There was a friend of mine named Zakaria Rashid. May Allah have mercy on him. And so I went and met his father, and his father's name was Elwan Rashid. May Allah have mercy upon him, a very, very unusual, intellectual, powerful thinking person. And he sent me to Sheikh Ahmed Faisal from the Islamic Mission of America. And on October the 5th, 1965, at the Islamic Mission of America, I became Muslim. So I never went through the Nation of Islam. I took my Shahada directly. And then, as for my Islamic, we can say my Islamic evolution, it started in October.
How did your family and the people around you react to your conversion to Islam?
It started with my father. I didn't meet my father until I was 22. When I did meet him, I think he passed away when I was 27. So I didn't know him until he died, and then I buried him. I was fortunate enough to have a good relationship with him before he died, and he asked me to wash him and bury him the way that we wash and bury the Muslims. He asked me to wash him because I was an imam at the time, and my sister told him that I was responsible, that when people passed away in my community, I was the person that did the washing and the burial. I wish that he would have accepted Islam, but maybe in his own way he did, because we had several conversations. And secondly, my mother never resisted Islam. She told me, son, if you believe that this way of life is going to make you a better person, just go. But don't be a blind follower. That's what she told me. And my mother she accepted Islam 11 years before she died. And so my sister